The dinner rush at Le Bernardin was in full swing when Jerome Williams approached table 12, his black uniform wrinkled from 14 hours of back-to-back shifts. The fabric clung to his tired shoulders, and his shoes, polished that morning but now scuffed from endless trips between kitchen and dining room, squeaked softly against the marble floor. He balanced 3 plates of the restaurant's signature lobster thermidor on his left arm, the steam rising like whispered prayers into the golden chandelier light above. Table 12. The Ashford Party. Reservation for 8:30, extension of their stay well past 11. Jerome had been serving them for 2 hours, and each interaction felt like walking through quicksand. "Excuse me," Jerome said quietly, approaching the table where 4 well-dressed couples sat in animated conversation. "Your lobster thermidor." The conversation stopped. Not gradually, not naturally, but like a record player yanked from its socket. 8 pairs of eyes turned to Jerome, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mrs. Ashford, dripping in diamonds that caught the light like tiny suns, looked Jerome up and down with the kind of scrutiny reserved for something unpleasant discovered on the bottom of an expensive shoe. Her husband, Richard Ashford, CEO of Ashford Holdings and a man whose net worth could buy small countries, leaned back in his chair with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Look at this," Richard said, his voice loud enough for neighboring tables to hear. "They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel for staff these days, aren't they?" Laughter erupted from the table. Not the warm, inclusive kind that brings people together, but the sharp, cutting kind designed to slice and wound. Mrs. Ashford covered her mouth with a manicured hand, her eyes dancing with cruel amusement. "Richard, stop," she said, but her voice carried no real protest. "Though I have to say, I've never seen a waiter look quite so disheveled. Are you sure you work here?" Jerome's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Yes, ma'am. I've been your server this evening. The lobster is prepared with our chef's special." "I didn't ask for a dissertation," Richard interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "Just put the food down and try not to drip sweat on it. And for God's sake, stand up straight. You look like you've been sleeping on the street." More laughter. Jerome felt the familiar burn in his chest, the one that had become as constant as his heartbeat over the past 6 months. He placed the first plate down gently, his movements precise despite the tremor in his hands. "Actually," said Mrs. Patterson, another woman at the table whose voice dripped with false concern, "shouldn't there be standards for appearance? I mean, look at him. His uniform is wrinkled, his posture is terrible, and honestly, he looks like he hasn't seen a shower in days." Jerome bit the inside of his cheek hard enough to taste copper. The truth was, he had showered that morning, in the YMCA locker room, using the small bar of soap he'd managed to stretch for 3 weeks. His uniform was wrinkled because he'd slept in his car again, unable to afford both rent and his mother's chemotherapy medications. But these people didn't need to know that. These people wouldn't care. "I apologize if my appearance is not to your standards," Jerome said, placing the second plate down with the same careful precision. "I assure you, the food quality remains." "Oh, spare us the corporate speak," laughed Mr. Patterson, a man whose red face suggested he'd had one too many glasses of the restaurant's most expensive wine. "We're not complaining to corporate. We're just making an observation. You look like you'd be more comfortable serving burgers at McDonald's than fine dining at Le Bernardin." The table erupted in fresh laughter. Jerome caught sight of other diners turning to watch the spectacle, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed by association. Others watched with the kind of morbid fascination reserved for car accidents. But Jerome noticed something else. In the corner booth, partially hidden by an elaborate flower arrangement, sat a man in a simple gray suit. Unlike the others, he wasn't laughing. He wasn't even smiling. His dark eyes were fixed on the scene with an intensity that made Jerome's skin prickle. The man appeared to be alone, a half-finished meal in front of him, but his attention was entirely focused on table 12. Jerome placed the final plate down and stepped back. "Is there anything else I can get for you this evening?" "Actually, yes," Richard said, his voice taking on a tone of exaggerated patience. Could you send over a real waiter? Someone who looks like they actually belong in an establishment like this? My wife and I are celebrating our anniversary, and we'd prefer someone who doesn't look like they wandered in from a homeless shelter. The words hit Jerome like physical blows. Each syllable was designed to humiliate, to diminish, to remind him of exactly where these people thought he belonged in the world's hierarchy. He felt his mother's face flash in his mind, pale and tired in the hospital bed, trusting him to find a way to pay for the treatments that might save her life. I understand your concerns, Jerome said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll speak with my manager. You do that, Mrs. Ashford said, not bothering to look at him as she spoke. And while you're at it, maybe suggest some basic grooming standards. This is Le Bernardin, not a soup kitchen. As Jerome turned to walk away, he heard Mr. Patterson's voice behind him. Poor kid probably can't even afford a decent meal, let alone proper clothes. What is this place thinking, hiring people like that? Jerome's steps faltered for just a moment. People like that. The phrase echoed in his mind as he made his way toward the kitchen, past tables full of diners who suddenly seemed to be looking at him differently. Some with pity, others with disdain, most with the kind of uncomfortable awareness that comes when witnessing someone else's humiliation. He pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen, where the familiar chaos of dinner service provided temporary refuge. The head chef, Marcel, looked up from plating a soufflé. Jerome, table 12 is asking for you, called Sarah, another server, without looking up from her order pad. They seem upset about something. Jerome leaned against the steel prep counter, closing his eyes for a moment. They want a different waiter. Marcel's hands paused in their work. What happened? The usual, Jerome said quietly. Wrong color, wrong class, wrong everything. Sarah finally looked up, her face creased with concern. Did you tell them where they could stick their attitude? Jerome managed a weak smile. I need this job, Sarah. My mother. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone who worked at Le Bernardin knew about Jerome's situation. Former investment banker, lost everything in the market crash 2 years ago. Mother diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. Medical bills that would make grown men weep. He'd taken the waiting job because it was the only thing available that offered immediate cash tips, and every dollar mattered when your mother's life hung in the balance. I'll take table 12, Sarah said, untying her apron. You handle my section for the rest of the night. No, Jerome said firmly. I can handle this. Marcel stepped forward, his French accent thick with concern. Jerome, mon ami, you do not have to endure abuse to keep this job. I will speak to management. And tell them what? Jerome asked. That their customers don't like the way I look? That they think I don't belong here? You think management is going to choose me over customers who spend $500 on wine? The kitchen fell quiet except for the sizzle of sautéing vegetables and the low hum of industrial refrigerators. Everyone knew Jerome was right. Le Bernardin catered to the wealthy elite, and the wealthy elite had certain expectations about who should be serving them. Jerome straightened his shoulders and retied his apron. I'm going back out there. Jerome, Sarah started. I said I'm going back out there. He pushed through the doors again, emerging into the dining room like a gladiator entering the arena. The man in the gray suit was still there, still watching, though now he was speaking quietly into his phone. Jerome couldn't hear the words, but something about the man's demeanor suggested this wasn't a casual conversation. Table 12 had been reassigned to Marcus, another waiter, but Jerome could see Richard Ashford gesturing animatedly as he spoke to Marcus. The new waiter nodded and smiled, his blonde hair and clean-cut appearance apparently meeting with the table's approval. Jerome was assigned to clean table 7, recently vacated by a couple who'd left without incident. As he cleared plates and reset the table, he could hear fragments of conversation from table 12. Much better, Mrs. Ashford was saying. See how much more professional he looks. Night and day, agreed her husband. I don't know what they were thinking with the other one. Jerome's hands moved mechanically, clearing, wiping, resetting. Each motion was automatic, perfected through months of repetition. But his mind was elsewhere, calculating and recalculating. 3 more hours until closing. Maybe $40 in tips if he was lucky. His mother's next treatment was scheduled for Friday, and he was still $200 short. If you've ever felt judged by your appearance or circumstances, hit that subscribe button right now, because Jerome's story is just beginning, and what happens next will show you that sometimes the people watching are not who you think they are. Drop a comment and tell us about a time when someone underestimated you based on how you looked. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of hostile glances and whispered comments. Word had spread among the staff about the incident at Table 12, and reactions varied wildly. Some, like Sarah and Marcel, offered quiet support and solidarity. Others seemed to view Jerome as a liability, someone whose presence might threaten their own tips and job security. "Look, I'm not saying they were right," said Kevin, another waiter, during a brief lull in service. "But maybe you could, try a little harder with your appearance. Iron your shirt, stand up straighter. First impressions matter in this business." Jerome stared at Kevin, wondering if the younger man had any idea what it was like to choose between laundry money and food money, between a decent shirt and medication for your dying mother. Kevin lived in a studio apartment in Queens, complained constantly about his student loans, but had never slept in a car or washed his hair in a restaurant bathroom. "I'll keep that in mind," Jerome said evenly. As the night wore on, Jerome noticed that the man in the gray suit had finished his meal but remained seated, occasionally making notes in a small leather journal. He'd ordered coffee, 3 cups over the course of 2 hours, and seemed to be in no hurry to leave. Several times, Jerome caught the man watching him, not with the cruel amusement of the Ashford table, but with something else. Something that looked almost like evaluation. At 11:30, the last customers finally departed. Jerome had served 12 tables, been stiffed on tips by 4 of them, and endured comments about his appearance from at least half. His feet ached, his back screamed in protest, and the burn in his chest had spread to his throat. The man in the gray suit was among the last to leave. As he passed the service station where Jerome was counting his meager tips, he paused. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice cultured but not pretentious. "You're Jerome, correct?" Jerome looked up, immediately wary. In his experience, customers who remembered his name rarely had good news. "Yes, sir." "Is there a problem with your service this evening?" The man smiled, the first genuine smile Jerome had seen all night. "Quite the opposite, actually. I was very impressed with your professionalism. Especially given the circumstances." Jerome's grip tightened on the $20 bills in his hand. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Tell me," the man continued, "how long have you been working here?" 6 months, Jerome replied carefully. "And before that?" Jerome hesitated. He'd learned to be cautious about sharing his background. Some people became uncomfortable when they learned he'd once earned more in a month than they made in a year. Others seemed to take pleasure in his fall from grace. "I was in finance," Jerome said finally. The man nodded as if this confirmed something he already knew. "Goldman Sachs, wasn't it? Senior analyst in the derivatives department?" Jerome's blood turned to ice water. Who are you?" The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "David Chen. I'm in the restaurant business myself. I've been observing operations here for the past few weeks." Jerome took the card with trembling fingers. "Chen Hospitality Group." The name was vaguely familiar, but Jerome couldn't place it. "I don't understand. You've been watching the restaurant?" "Something like that," Chen said cryptically. "Tell me, Jerome, what do you think about loyalty?" The question was so unexpected that Jerome had to process it twice. "Loyalty, sir?" "Yes. Loyalty to colleagues, to principles, to basic human decency. What do you think it's worth?" Jerome looked around the nearly empty dining room. The Ashford party had left an hour ago, along with their laughter and their cruelty. The other servers were finishing their closing duties, tired and eager to go home to warm beds and comfortable apartments. I think, Jerome said slowly, that loyalty is something you give even when it's not returned. Even when it costs you something. Chen studied him for a long moment. Interesting perspective. And what about dignity? How much is that worth? Everything, Jerome said without hesitation. It's the only thing they can't take from you unless you let them. Even when maintaining it costs you tips? Costs you comfort? Costs you the approval of people who could make your life easier? Jerome thought about the Ashford table, about the choice he'd faced between defending himself and keeping the job his mother's life depended on. Especially then. Chen nodded slowly, then extended his hand. It was a pleasure meeting you, Jerome. I have a feeling we'll be speaking again soon. As the older man walked toward the exit, Jerome stared at the business card in his hand. Chen Hospitality Group. Something about the name nagged at him, like a word on the tip of his tongue that refused to surface. Who was that? Sarah asked, appearing at his elbow with a stack of menus to be cleaned. I'm not sure, Jerome admitted. Someone in the restaurant business. Said he's been observing operations here. Sarah frowned. That's weird. Corporate doesn't usually send people without telling management. She paused, studying Jerome's face. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Jerome pocketed the business card and forced a smile. Just tired. Long night. But as he finished his closing duties and prepared to head out to his car, his temporary bedroom, Jerome couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. David Chen had known about his background at Goldman Sachs, had been watching the restaurant for weeks, and had asked strange questions about loyalty and dignity. More troubling was the way Chen had looked at him during the conversation. Not with pity or disdain, but with something that looked almost like recognition. As if he saw something in Jerome that others missed. The parking lot was mostly empty when Jerome finally made his way outside. His 2010 Honda Civic sat under a broken streetlight, its paint faded and its back seat converted into a makeshift bedroom with a pillow and blanket. Home sweet home. As he settled into the driver's seat, Jerome pulled out his phone to check for messages. One text from his mother's nurse: treatment went well today. She's asking about you. Try to visit tomorrow if you can. Jerome stared at the message until his eyes blurred. Try to visit tomorrow. As if it was a choice, as if he wouldn't move heaven and earth to see his mother every single day if he could afford the gas money for the drive to the hospital. He was about to put the phone away when he remembered David Chen's business card. Curious, he Googled Chen Hospitality Group. The search results made his heart stop. Chen Hospitality Group was one of the largest restaurant conglomerates on the East Coast. They owned over 200 establishments, from casual dining chains to high-end establishments like Le Bernardin. Jerome's hands shook as he clicked through the company website. There, on the executive team page, was David Chen's photo and title, CEO and founder. The man who had been sitting in the corner booth all evening, watching Jerome endure humiliation after humiliation, was the owner of the restaurant. But that wasn't the most shocking part. According to the company's About Us page, Chen Hospitality Group had just acquired Le Bernardin 3 weeks ago. The sale had been conducted quietly, with existing management staying in place during the transition period. David Chen wasn't just any restaurant owner. He was Jerome's new boss. And he'd been watching everything. Jerome sat in his car for an hour, the engine off, the parking lot growing quieter as the last employees departed. His mind raced through the implications of what he'd learned. Chen had been there during the Ashford incident. He'd seen the humiliation, the laughter, the cruel comments about Jerome's appearance and worthiness. He'd also seen Jerome's response. The quiet dignity, the refusal to lash out, the professionalism maintained even under assault. Chen's questions about loyalty and dignity suddenly made sense. This hadn't been a chance encounter. It had been an evaluation. But an evaluation for what? Jerome thought about the way other staff members had reacted to the Ashford incident. Sarah and Marcel had offered support, but they were in the minority. Most had either ignored the situation entirely or, like Kevin, had suggested that Jerome was somehow at fault for not meeting the customer's expectations. Kevin. Jerome remembered the younger waiter's words, "Maybe you could try a little harder with your appearance." First impressions matter in this business. What would Kevin say if he knew that the man evaluating first impressions was actually the owner of the restaurant? What would the Ashford party say if they knew their behavior had been witnessed by someone with the power to ban them permanently? A slow smile spread across Jerome's face for the first time all day. He didn't know what David Chin was planning, but something told him that the test he'd just endured was only the beginning. As Jerome finally started his car and prepared to find a safe place to sleep for the night, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change dramatically. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen, but after 6 months of humiliation and hardship, even uncertainty felt like hope. The street light above flickered back to life, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. In a few hours, Jerome would return to Le Bernardin for another shift, another day of serving people who looked through him as if he were invisible. But now he knew that someone had been watching. Someone who saw him not as a failure or a charity case, but as a man worthy of evaluation and interest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, new opportunities to prove himself. And Jerome Williams, former investment banker turned waiter, was ready for whatever came next. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching Jerome's mood as he prepared for another shift at Le Bernardin. He'd slept fitfully in his car, parked behind a 24-hour diner where the overnight manager had grown accustomed to his presence. The diner's manager, Rosa, was a middle-aged Puerto Rican woman who'd noticed Jerome's situation months ago and never said anything beyond offering him free coffee when she could. Jerome washed his face and brushed his teeth in the diner's restroom, then sat in a corner booth with a cup of coffee and yesterday's newspaper. The sports section was his escape, a world where performance mattered more than appearance, where merit was measured in statistics rather than perception. "You're up early," Rosa said, sliding into the seat across from him. The morning rush wouldn't start for another hour, and the diner was nearly empty. "Couldn't sleep," Jerome admitted. "Too much thinking." Rosa studied his face with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every variety of human struggle come through her doors. "Good thinking or bad thinking?" "I'm not sure yet." She nodded as if this made perfect sense. Rosa never pushed for details, never offered advice unless asked. She simply provided a safe space and let people work through their problems at their own pace. Jerome's phone buzzed with a text message. "Unknown number, good morning, Jerome. Would you be available for a brief conversation before your shift today? David Chen." Jerome stared at the message, his coffee growing cold in his hands. David Chen wanted to talk. The CEO of Chen Hospitality Group, owner of Le Bernardin, the man who'd witnessed yesterday's humiliation, wanted to have a conversation. "Everything okay?" Rosa asked, noticing his expression. "My boss wants to see me," Jerome said carefully. "The kind of conversation where you need coffee first, or the kind where you need something stronger?" Despite everything, Jerome smiled. "Definitely coffee." He texted back, "Yes, sir. I can be there by 10 a.m. if that works for you." The response came immediately, "Perfect. Please come to the office above the restaurant. Ask for David at the host station." Jerome finished his coffee, gathered his things, and prepared to face whatever David Chen had in store. As he walked to his car, Rosa called out from behind the diner's counter. "Jerome," she said, "remember what I told you about dignity?" Months ago, during one of their brief conversations, Rosa had shared her philosophy about surviving difficult times. "Dignity," she'd said, "is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And the stronger it gets, the harder it becomes for others to take it from you." "I remember," Jerome replied. "Good. You're going to need it today." Le Bernardin looked different in the morning light. Without the warm glow of evening ambience, the restaurant appeared more businesslike, more serious. Jerome entered through the employee entrance, his uniform freshly pressed thanks to an iron in the diner's break room that Rosa had let him use. The host station was staffed by Amanda, the morning manager, who looked surprised to see Jerome so early. "Jerome? Your shift doesn't start until noon." "I'm here to see David," Jerome said, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. Amanda's expression shifted from surprise to something approaching respect. "Mr. Chen is expecting you. Take the elevator to the 3rd floor. His office is at the end of the hall." The elevator ride felt like it lasted hours. Jerome had been in the restaurant's upper floors before, storage rooms, employee break areas, administrative offices, but never the executive level. When the doors opened, he found himself in a quietly elegant hallway lined with photographs of Chen Hospitality Group's various restaurants. David Chen's office was behind a heavy wooden door marked simply D. Chen. Jerome knocked twice. "Come in." The office was spacious but not ostentatious. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the walls were lined with bookshelves rather than the typical corporate awards and photographs. Chen sat behind a simple wooden desk, wearing the same gray suit from the night before. "Jerome, thank you for coming. Please, sit." Jerome took the chair across from Chen's desk, his back straight, hands folded in his lap. Every instinct told him to be careful, to say as little as possible until he understood what this conversation was really about. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here," Chen said. "Yes, sir." Chen leaned back in his chair, studying Jerome with the same intensity he'd shown the night before. "What did you think of last night's dinner service?" The question was so broad that Jerome wasn't sure how to answer. It was challenging. Because of the Ashford party? Jerome's throat tightened. "Among other things, yes." "Tell me about your interaction with them." Jerome chose his words carefully. "They expressed dissatisfaction with my appearance and requested a different server." Chen smiled slightly. "That's a very diplomatic way to describe what I witnessed." "They were cruel, Jerome. Deliberately and unnecessarily cruel." "How did that make you feel?" The direct question caught Jerome off guard. In 6 months of waiting tables, no one had ever asked him how customer treatment made him feel. The assumption was always that servers should absorb abuse with a smile and be grateful for the privilege. Frustrated, Jerome said honestly. "Angry. But mostly sad." "Sad?" "That people can look at another human being and see so little value that they think cruelty is acceptable." Chen nodded slowly. "And yet you maintained your professionalism throughout the encounter. Why?" Jerome thought about his mother, about the medical bills, about the car he slept in and the dignity Rosa had taught him to protect. "Because my behavior is the only thing I can control. I can't control how people treat me, but I can control how I respond. Even when that response costs you tips? Even when it might cost you your job? Especially then." Chen was quiet for a long moment, making notes in the same leather journal Jerome had seen the night before. When he looked up, his expression was unreadable. "Jerome, I want to tell you something about Chen Hospitality Group. Something that's not in our marketing materials or annual reports." Jerome waited. "Every restaurant we acquire goes through what I call a culture assessment. It's not about the food or the decor or the profit margins. It's about the people. How they treat each other when they think no one important is watching." Chen stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. "I spend weeks in each new acquisition, usually undercover, observing interactions between staff and customers, between employees at different levels, between management and workers. I'm looking for character, Jerome. Integrity under pressure. Kindness when it costs something." Jerome's pulse quickened as he began to understand the scope of what Chen was describing. "Last night," Chen continued, "I saw a server endure deliberate humiliation while maintaining his dignity and professionalism. I saw him choose respect over retaliation, even when it cost him financially. I also saw other staff members react to that situation in various ways. Some showed solidarity. Others showed indifference. A few showed something worse." Chen returned to his desk and opened a file folder. Inside were photographs, screenshots from security cameras showing various interactions throughout the restaurant over what appeared to be several weeks. Kevin Morrison, Chen said, sliding a photo across the desk. It showed Kevin laughing with a table of customers while pointing in Jerome's direction. 2 weeks ago, after you spilled soup on your uniform during the lunch rush. Instead of offering to help or staying silent, he entertained his table with a running commentary about your clumsiness. Jerome remembered the incident. He'd been carrying too many plates, trying to cover an extra section when another server called in sick. The spill had been minor, quickly cleaned up, but Kevin had indeed used it as material for his customers' amusement. Chen slid another photo across the desk. Maria Santos, night manager. Last Tuesday, when Mrs. Pemberton complained about your unprofessional appearance. Instead of defending you or explaining that you'd just worked a double shift, Maria apologized for your inadequacy and promised to speak with you about presentation standards. Jerome's jaw tightened. He remembered that conversation with Maria, conducted in the kitchen where other staff could hear every word. She'd lectured him about representing the establishment appropriately while making no effort to understand his circumstances. On the other hand, Chen continued, producing a different set of photos. Sarah Mitchell has consistently shown you support and respect. Marcel Dubois has gone out of his way to include you in kitchen conversations and has publicly defended your work ethic. Rosa from the diner across the street, Chen smiled at Jerome's surprised expression, has been providing you with free coffee and access to facilities without being asked to do so by anyone in management. Jerome stared at the photographs, seeing his life at Le Bernardin from an entirely different perspective. Every interaction, every kindness, every cruelty had been observed and catalogued. Mr. Chen, Jerome said slowly, what exactly are you telling me? Chen closed the file folder and leaned forward. I'm telling you that for the past 6 weeks, you've been participating in the most comprehensive character assessment I've ever conducted. And Jerome, you've passed with flying colors. The words hit Jerome like a physical force. Character assessment? Every restaurant we acquire has employees who reveal their true nature when they think their jobs might be at risk, when they see someone they perceive as vulnerable, when they have an opportunity to show kindness or cruelty without consequences. You, Jerome, have consistently chosen dignity, kindness, and professionalism even under the most challenging circumstances. Jerome's mind raced. The man who's been coming in for lunch every Tuesday, the one who always requests your section and tips 20% but never speaks. My assistant, conducting additional observations. The health inspector who seemed unusually interested in employee interactions. Not a health inspector. Jerome sat back in his chair, overwhelmed. How much of it was real? All of it, Chen said firmly. The Ashford party was real. Their cruelty was real. Your financial situation is real, and so is your mother's illness. I never created artificial situations, Jerome. I simply observed how people behaved in real circumstances. Chen opened his desk drawer and pulled out another file folder, this one much thicker. Goldman Sachs, Senior Analyst, Derivatives Department. MBA from Wharton, summa cum laude. 5 years of stellar performance reviews before the market crash wiped out your portfolio and your mother's medical emergency depleted your savings. Jerome's throat tightened. You investigated my background. I did my due diligence, Chen corrected. Just as I would for any potential executive hire. The word executive hung in the air between them like a challenge. Mr. Chen, I'm not sure I understand what you're offering. Chen smiled, the first truly warm expression Jerome had seen from him. I'm offering you a position, Jerome. Not as a server, but as Director of Employee Relations for Chen Hospitality Group. Your job would be to ensure that every restaurant in our network maintains the kind of culture where dignity and respect are non-negotiable values. Jerome's vision blurred. What? Salary of $95,000 annually, full benefits including health insurance that would cover your mother's treatments, company car, and stock options. You'd be based here in New York but would travel to our other locations to conduct the same kind of cultural assessments you've just experienced. The numbers felt surreal. $95,000. health insurance for his mother, a company car, which meant he wouldn't have to sleep in his Honda Civic anymore. "Why me?" Jerome asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Chen leaned forward, his expression serious. "Because in 6 weeks of observation, under circumstances that would have broken most people's spirit, you never once compromised your integrity. You never took your frustration out on colleagues, never treated customers poorly regardless of how they treated you, never used your education or background to claim superiority over fellow servers. You simply showed up every day and did your job with dignity." Jerome thought about the nights in his car, the mornings at Rose's diner, the endless calculations of tips and expenses. He thought about his mother's face during their last video call, trying to hide her pain so he wouldn't worry. "There's one condition," Chin continued. "You'll need to complete the transition period here at Le Bernardin. Work alongside the new management team as they implement our cultural standards. Some staff will be staying. Others will not." Jerome's mind immediately went to Kevin, to Maria, to the various colleagues who had shown their true characters during his lowest moments. "What about the people who didn't pass your assessment?" Chen's expression grew cold. "Employment termination meetings begin this afternoon. Kevin Morrison will be first, followed by Maria Santos and 3 other staff members who demonstrated patterns of behavior inconsistent with our values." Jerome felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that he wouldn't have to work with people who had shown him such contempt. Guilt for feeling relieved. Satisfaction that actions had consequences. Concern for people losing their jobs, even people who had treated him poorly. "Jerome," Chen said, reading his expression, "kindness doesn't mean accepting abuse. Compassion doesn't require you to enable cruelty. The people being terminated made choices over a period of weeks. They're facing the consequences of those choices." Jerome nodded, understanding the logic but still processing the emotional complexity. "I need to ask," Jerome said, "what happens to the Ashford party? To customers who behave the way they did last night?" Chen's smile turned predatory. "Richard Ashford received a call this morning informing him that he and his party are permanently banned from all Chen Hospitality Group establishments. His business associates, who are considering using our private dining rooms for a major corporate event, will be selecting a different venue." Jerome's eyes widened. "You banned them?" "Jerome, we're in the hospitality business. Our job is to create exceptional experiences for people who treat our staff with basic human decency. Anyone who believes that paying for a meal gives them the right to dehumanize our employees is not the kind of customer we want." The conversation continued for another hour, covering details about the new position, the transition timeline, and Chen's broader vision for creating restaurant environments where dignity was paramount. By the time Jerome left the office, his entire life had shifted on its axis. As he rode the elevator back down to the main restaurant level, Jerome thought about Rosa's words about dignity being like a muscle. For 6 months, he'd been strengthening that muscle without realizing he was training for anything beyond survival. Now he understood that every moment of maintained dignity, every choice to respond with professionalism instead of anger, every instance of treating others with respect regardless of how they treated him, had been preparation for this moment. When the elevator doors opened, Jerome Williams stepped out as a different man than the one who had entered. Not because his circumstances had changed, though they had, dramatically, but because he finally understood that his character had been his strength all along. He had 4 hours before his final shift as a server at Le Bernardin. Tomorrow, he would begin a new chapter as Director of Employee Relations for Chen Hospitality Group. But first, he had a phone call to make to his mother. Jerome sat in his car outside the hospital, staring at his phone. How do you tell someone that your life just changed completely? He pressed call. "Jerome?" His mother's voice was weak but alert. "Is everything okay?" "Mom, everything's going to be okay. Better than okay." He told her about David Chen, the secret assessment, the job offer that would cover her treatments. By the time he finished, they were both crying. "I'm so proud of you, baby. You never stopped being the man I raised you to be." When Jerome returned to Le Bernardin for his final shift as a server, the atmosphere was electric. Kevin Morrison had been fired that morning, along with Maria Santos and 3 others. Word spread quickly about termination meetings and corporate assessments. Sarah found Jerome in the break room, eyes wide with shock. "Jerome, what's happening?" "Kevin said something about secret cameras. And rumors that you met with the new owner?" "Good people don't have anything to worry about," Jerome said carefully. Before he could explain more, all staff were called to the main dining room. David Chen stood at the head of a conference table, flanked by executives from Chen Hospitality Group. "Good afternoon, everyone. I know this has been a day of significant changes. Some colleagues are no longer with us because their behavior was inconsistent with our values." Chen activated a large screen showing security footage from the past 6 weeks. The first clip showed Kevin laughing with customers while pointing at Jerome. "Don't worry about him. Guy's kind of a mess, but we keep him around for entertainment." Staff shifted uncomfortably. The next clip showed Maria apologizing to Mrs. Pemberton about Jerome's unprofessional appearance instead of defending an employee who'd worked 16 hours straight. "These interactions represent a fundamental misunderstanding of hospitality," Chen explained. "True hospitality means treating every human being with dignity and respect." He showed positive clips next, Sarah sharing food with Jerome, Marcel defending his work ethic, Rosa from the diner offering free coffee and facilities. "I want to introduce your new Director of Employee Relations, Jerome Williams." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Jerome has demonstrated remarkable character under challenging circumstances. While dealing with financial hardship and family medical emergencies, he consistently chose professionalism over retaliation, dignity over desperation. Jerome stood, his legs unsteady. "6 months ago, I walked into this restaurant desperate for any job. I had lost everything, my career, savings, confidence." He looked around the room. "I learned that character isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when you think no one cares, when there's nothing to gain except staying true to yourself." If you're inspired by stories of character triumphing over circumstances, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Jerome's transformation shows that our response to adversity defines our destiny. Comment about a time when your values led to unexpected opportunities. Sarah, you shared food when you thought I was too proud to ask. Marcel, you included me when others made me invisible. Those actions mattered more than you knew. Chen stepped forward. Jerome will implement new standards for employee treatment. No one should endure what Jerome experienced. He showed footage of the Ashford table incident, the cruel laughter, deliberate humiliation. Jerome's maintained professionalism throughout. The Ashford party has been permanently banned from all Chen restaurants. Paying for a meal doesn't give anyone the right to dehumanize our staff. The meeting continued with new policies and training schedules. Afterward, colleagues surrounded Jerome with congratulations and questions. Amanda, the morning manager, approached privately. "Jerome, I owe you an apology. I saw how people treated you and didn't speak up. That was cowardice." "You were always professional and fair," Jerome replied. "We can work together to create a culture where people feel empowered to support each other." Near closing time, Rosa from the diner appeared. "Heard something big happen today. Thought you might need a friendly face." Jerome hugged her tightly. "I can't thank you enough for everything." "You don't owe me thanks, Mijo. Just remember this feeling when you're in position to help someone else." In the break room, David Chen found Jerome packing his server supplies for the last time. "How are you feeling?" Chen asked, offering coffee. "Overwhelmed. Grateful. Terrified. The fear means you understand the responsibility." Chen's expression grew distant. 25 years ago, I was a dishwasher in Chinatown. Spoke little English, had no family here. Staff treated me like I was invisible. Customers made cruel comments about these people taking jobs." Jerome listened intently. "One day, a server named Marcus stood up for me when a customer was being cruel. He didn't have to, it cost him a tip, maybe his job. But he said, 'That man works harder than anyone I know, and he deserves your respect.' What happened to Marcus? Chen smiled. He's now Chief Operating Officer of Chen Hospitality Group. You'll meet him next week. Jerome, remember something as you begin this role. You weren't chosen because you survived difficult circumstances. You were chosen because of how you survived them, with grace, dignity, your humanity intact. Jerome's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. With your new insurance, we can schedule the advanced treatment. I'm so proud of you, son. As Jerome prepared to leave Le Bernardin for the last time as a server, he reflected on everyone who shaped this journey. Sarah and Marcel's kindness. Rosa's sanctuary. Even Kevin and Maria, whose behavior highlighted the importance of character under pressure. Most importantly, David Chen, a former dishwasher who built an empire on the principle that everyone deserves dignity, regardless of circumstances. Jerome walked out that night as a different man. Not because his external circumstances changed, but because he discovered his character had always been his greatest asset. The test was over. He had passed. Tomorrow, he would help others do the same. Jerome's story reminds us that character is revealed not in triumph, but in how we respond to adversity. When customers mocked him, colleagues dismissed him, circumstances seemed hopeless, Jerome chose dignity over desperation. That choice, made consistently through months of struggle, led to opportunities that transformed his life and his ability to impact others. If this story moved you, subscribe for more inspiring stories of people who refuse to let circumstances define their character. Share in the comments about maintaining integrity during difficult times leading to unexpected opportunities. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to hear to keep believing that dignity and character always matter, even when no one seems to be watching. Remember, you never know who might be observing your choices, and your character under pressure might open doors you never knew existed.